Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to go over the Book of Rust. This video is designed for people who don't play these factions, so we're not going to cover the restrictions on each of the detachments, for example, but we will cover the key abilities and top combos and stratagems that you need to be aware of if you're playing against somebody with one of these armies. There should be timestamps in this video if you want to skip ahead to the faction that you're specifically here for. However, we're going to start off with Metalica. I am joined, of course, by Alfred Farius. Alfred, what's in store for Metalica?
Out of the Metalica things in this book, the warlord traits to watch out for is Master Annihilator. You select a unit within 6 and it gets plus 6 inches to range and plus 1 strength for radium weapons. Radium weapons are something you'll find on their Vanguard, and they can get that extra 6 inches to range just when you think you are safe. The other warlord trait you want to be aware of is Radioactive Emanation, and that takes away toughness from non-Metalica units within 6 inches.
Yeah, Metalica are really wanting to shoot you from afar. They have a whole bunch of abilities that will punish your units if they get too close, and this is the first of many.
First relic to be aware of is Bionics of Veneration. That gives the bearer a 4-up invulnerable save and makes them -1 to be hit if they're within 3 inches. Metalican Lung. This is a relic that allows you to choose a unit within 3 inches of the bearer, and then all Metalica units can reroll wounds against that.
They also have some stratagems that can be used against units that are close by. So for example, Order of Anarchy is +1 to hit against a unit within 12, and Omnisci's Exaltation is -1 to combat attrition test to units within 6, and Blaring Glory is a defensive strat, which means that if you're within 6 inches of a Metalica unit, you cannot re-roll any dice when attacking it.
You've got Purity of the Machine, which allows Metalica units to ignore modifiers while shooting. If you think you've got -1 to hit for being an aircraft, they can ignore that. Lightning Fast, ignore that, etc. You've got Extinction Order, where they will choose a terrain piece, and then units within 6 inches of the warlord will get +1 to wound against units wholly within terrain piece. What this means is that if you've castled up on one big ruin, watch out, because they will choose that terrain piece, and suddenly a huge chunk of their army are going to get +1 to wound against you.
So the other rules for AdMech in this book are in the Mechanicus Defense Cohort, and there are a couple of faction abilities you need to be aware of here. So firstly, they get -1 damage when they are shot at if they're in their deployment zone or by an objective, and if any of their units are charged, they can hold steady or set to defend, so that means they can get the Overwatch on 5s, or they can get +1 when attacking in combat.
They also have their own warlord trait, which allows them to give objective secured to robots, because this is a robot cohort, within 6 inches of the warlord.
They do have some strats you need to watch out for. So for example, Citation of Ruin basically means that all of their models can actually fire into combat, and they won't suffer the -1 penalty to hit that vehicles traditionally do when you're using heavy weapons. If they stay in their deployment zone, they can actually get extra defenses from using bolster defenses, and this means that they're going to get an even better save than they normally would. And finally, they have Rad Bombardment, which is like an orbital strike and is a way for them to do a whole bunch of mortal wounds. It's a bit swingy, but it could really take out some characters on low wounds if you think they're hidden, and it will also reduce the toughness characteristic of models in their unit. And finally, the Wandering Knights of the Imperium can gather together in the form of a Freeblade Lance. One of the things this is going to do is give those knights access to the traditional household relics and warlord traits, so do just check with your opponent what kind of abilities they have there, and also it gives you access to some stratagems. I really like Strength from Exile, and this gives you reroll hits and wounds of 1 if your Freeblade is away from the other Freeblades in your army, which is pretty thematic and cool actually.
Next up, you've got House Raven.
House Raven has given me some flashbacks because they were actually the meta when I first started playing 40k, so part of me, as happy as I am to see rules for knights, is dreading it just a tiny little bit.
Warlord traits to watch out for: Inviolate, which gives them a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds, helpful against Smite Spam. And you've got Blessed by Metalica, which gives them +2 wounds and lets them be repaired by Metalica Tech Priests. Stratagems: you've got Hammer Blow, which lets them reroll 1s to hit when shooting blast weapons at units with 6 or more models, so watch out for that on rapid fire battle cannons. You've got Honor Inviolate, which gives +1 strength on their ranged weapons if they don't advance. That can be really strong on an Avenger Gatling cannon, putting them to strength 7. You've also got Shadow's Reach, where they will count models within 3 as being within engagement range, which on the size of a knight's base can be really strong.
Yeah, this will mean that all models within 3 inches will essentially count as falling back, so they won't be able to shoot or charge later on. There are some more defensive strats that they've got. They've got Colossi Eternal, and this means that if some knights are together, they can all get a 4-up invulnerable save. They've got Horrors at Bay, which can prevent the second rank in combat from fighting against them. And they've got Rolling Thunder, and this means that if the knight charged, models within 3 inches will suffer a -1 to hit. Up next, we're going to talk about Terminus Est, the flagship of Typhus. This video does require a bit of background on the Death Guard rules, so do check out that video if you're not familiar. And as a reminder, I've just put the contagion for the Harbingers on the screen now. It's going to do a lot of mortal wounds potentially. And the other ability that Terminus Est gives you is the ability to deep strike Budonicus Astartes units instead of the normal outflank. So you can deep strike your Plague Marines if you want to, for example.
The one warlord trait to be aware of is Harbinger of Death. Now if Typhus is in your Terminus Est force, he gets this. And enemy units within 3 will lose objective secured. Not only that, but you get +1 attack when enemy models are within range of this aura. For relics, you've got the Mark of Terminus Est, that gives +1 strength and stops wound rolls from being rerolled against the bearer. And not only that, but they can automatically pass a single failed saving throw. So put this on a Demon Prince, now you're cooking. You've got Vomi's Virulent Blight, and that gives a way for these Terminus Est to count one enemy unit as always being in contagion range. Finally, you've got the Raiment of Atrophy, where you can count Contagion of Nurgle abilities as being 1 round higher.
They also have access to their own Psychic Discipline, which is quite cool. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I put them on the screen just in case. There's a few to note though, I think. So Long Rot, which can stop a unit from advancing, and means that they can only charge units within 6 inches, so that can really stop a powerful unit from getting into combat. They have access to Rotwind, which can reduce the AP of weapons by 2, and they also have some mortal wound output, and I particularly like Accelerated Entropy, so you have a roll off with your opponent and add your toughness, and if the Death Guard player wins, it deals 3 mortal wounds, and if they actually get double the toughness, they do D3 plus 3.
For stratagems, you've got the Rotting Tide. This means that you're likely to see big units of Poxwalkers from Terminus Est, because once they've been killed, they can set that unit up again at its starting strength within 6 inches of battlefield edge.
I really want to see an Orc player play this army, because then both factions are just going to be bringing back units of full strength every turn.
Another way that they have to increase the effectiveness of Poxwalkers, Unleash the Horde. This allows their Poxwalkers to add 3 inches to movement, and when they pile and consolidate, they can move an additional 3. And while we're still on Poxwalkers, they do not care about Poxwalkers, because with Callous Disregard, they can shoot into combats that have Poxwalkers, and if they miss, they'll kill their friendly Poxwalkers, they don't care. Finally, they've got Pestilent Drop. This means that a unit coming in from Deep Strike can have their contagion increased to 12 inches, so they can use a unit as a contagion bomb, planted in the middle, have 12-inch bubble of -1 toughness. Bob's your uncle.
And I think we can all agree that Drukhari are really lacking some powerful rules right now, so they've actually got a supplement for Cult of Strife in this book, and they're pretty good. Just to mention the faction abilities, which are they fight first, and they can get +1 to charge if they're the first unit to charge that unit.
So in addition to them always fighting first, Drukhari have loads of ways of making the enemy fight last. So in case you thought you were fighting first, well they get to fight first and make you fight last, just to make sure.
So they also have access to a special character called Lilith Hesperax. So she is actually a Master Succubus and she has all of those abilities. Again, do check the Dark Eldar video if you're not familiar with them. But she also gets -1 to hit in combat, she gets reroll hits and wounds in combat versus characters, and she gets an ability where she can either choose to fall back and still charge, or she can fight again at the end of the fight phase. And then of course they have their own set of warlord traits, one of which you're probably very familiar with, which is of course Competitive Edge. Now what this means is that each time an attack doesn't do damage, essentially, you get to make another attack. And the reason this is powerful is because when you take Razor Flails, which says for each time you make an attack, you make 2 attacks, what this means is that when that succubus fails to get damage through, they then make another 2 attacks. So ultimately it means they can get an absolute ton of attacks, and they can obviously take things like relics and combat drugs to make them that bit killier. They do actually have 2 other warlord traits which have been somewhat overshadowed by Competitive Edge, but they are actually both pretty good and make that succubus a bit more killier or survivable, so I put them on the screen just now in case.
For relics, you've got Morvaine's Agonizer. This is an agonizer that can guaranteed stop a non-vehicle or non-monster from falling back. You're more likely to see this on the Hecatrix, the Sergeant of the Witches, and using the stratagem they can do this. Next up you've got Garland of Spite. They can select once again a non-vehicle and non-monster, and half the number of attacks it has. In addition, this relic automatically hits.
And naturally, Cult of Strife have a whole bunch of stratagems that they can use also. So they have Art of the Kill, which will give them reroll wounds in combat. They have Dance of Death, which basically means that a unit can move through models and terrain. This is going to be potentially devastating if you've castled up around some characters, but left some gaps in the middle for some witches to go.
They basically become Harlequins.
And they have Deadly Exemplar. So a succubus can extend their ability to all core units, which means that they can reroll ones in combat for the rest of the game after that succubus has killed a character or a monster.
Flawless approach, watch out if you're Tau, because infantry can't be overwatched, and the charge targets can't hold steady or set to defend. Pick them apart allows the unit to fall back and shoot or charge, which they can double up with Cruel Deception, allowing another unit to fall back and shoot or charge. And No Method Beyond Our Grasp, which allows for 2 CP them to shoot or fight twice for witches.
And finally, I'll just mention Invigorated by Evisceration, which can give an infantry or biker unit a 4-up invuln until the start of your next turn if that unit has killed something in combat. And that takes us to the end of this video on the factions in the Book of Rust. I hope you found that useful, and let us know in the comments what kind of things you're really scared of facing in the near future. But thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll see you when the AdMech Codex comes out.